Welcome to the channel. We're going to take a look at budget PC handhelds today. And by budget, I mean stuff that you can afford, hopefully under, $500, $600. And what that means is we'll be primarily looking at, you might say, the older generation of PC handhelds, because a lot of these manufacturers are on the cusp of releasing new devices. Some of them aren't, some of them are, but we'll talk about these anyway. We're going to talk about the Anbernic WIN600, which was an early PC handheld that was originally kind of out to compete with Steam Deck. We're going to talk about the quite popular ASUS ROG Ally. We're going to talk about Lenovo's Legion Go, the MSI Claw Intel-based handheld, and of course, the one that really started this craze, the Valve Steam Deck. So, we're going to talk about, just to give an overview of each handheld to begin with. We're going to talk a little bit about size and performance and have some conclusions. And by the way, we're not going to be doing a lot of demoing of gameplay and whatnot, because on the channel I have demo videos of the devices themselves, which, since we don't want this video to approach like 3 hours, I'm just going to point you to, if you want to see gameplay footage and other stuff like that, there are other videos on my channel. So let's get right to it. First off, this is not a Nintendo Switch. This is in fact an Anbernic WIN600, a PC handheld that is close to the same size as a Nintendo Switch. So a little thicker, but pretty similar in size. Let's talk about this device for a little bit. First off, the device sports a rather old chip, which is one of the problems with it. Basically an Athlon 3050E or a 3020E. I think most of the ones that are now available are the 3050 models. So probably should stay away from that. Probably should stay away from both of them, honestly. By default, you get usually 8 gigabytes of RAM or 16. It's actually user upgradable. The device I have, I had some spare memory around, so it actually has 32 gigs of RAM. Not that it helps it that much. The screen is 6 inches, and typical IPS screen. It's okay. It's only limited to 60 hertz though, so no high refresh rate gaming. Not that the system's really capable of it anyway. It comes with various sizes of internal storage. The model I have has a terabyte SSD, which is actually plenty of room for what you would want to put on here. Comes with Windows 11 and is one of the lighter of the PC handhelds that we're looking at in this video. So why might you want an Anbernic WIN600? So why might you want this thing? First off, relative to the other devices that we are talking about, it's actually fairly small, fairly light. It is the lightest of the handhelds I'm testing for this. And interesting point, you can actually upgrade the memory. All of the other devices that we're talking about in these videos, you are stuck with whatever memory it has. For the most part, it's 16 gigs, but you can actually update the memory in this, which is kind of neat. Now, it doesn't do a whole lot in terms of performance, unfortunately, but it's also something you can do if you want to. This system is probably better than some of the others for D-pad focused games. It's almost like the analog sticks here were kind of an afterthought, but this is a kind of a D-pad focused system. And also, unlike some of the devices, there are actually 2 USB ports, USB-A and USB-C. But having 2 USB ports is always nice, because that way you can hook up a device like a mouse or a keyboard without a dock, while still actually having some power. Now, why might you want to skip the Anbernic WIN600? Well, the real kicker is the performance of the WIN600 is kind of bottom of the barrel these days for PC devices. So you're not going to be playing modern games, at least not at reasonable frame rates. Even for PlayStation 2 emulation, it's just okay. There are Android handhelds that are cheaper than the WIN600 that will actually do things like PS2 emulation better, which is somewhat surprising because usually the PC is better at it. But you're not going to get very good performance out of the WIN600. Also, for some reason, unlike all the other devices, there's no micro SD slot, which seems to be an odd omission, but the only way you can update the storage in this thing is to change out the internal SSD, which is not impossible. It's actually fairly easy to open the WIN600, but this seems like an odd oversight from a company who I think literally every other device they've ever made has micro SD, but not the WIN600. You're also limited to a 60 hertz screen, and honestly, compared to the other devices that we're looking at, the build quality of the WIN600 is not that great. I mean, it has sometimes issues with the battery, not wanting to take a full charge. It's just kind of low end, I guess, is probably the best way to put it. The joysticks aren't that great. The system is just kind of okay in terms of how well it's put together. So this is a look at the WIN600. It is an option. It is available, at least these days, fairly cheaply. I don't think I would probably pay more than $200 for this. If that, I mean, there's other options you can get if you've got $200 and you want to play games. But I certainly don't think I would spend over $200 for this device. This is the ASUS ROG Ally. This is probably one of the most popular handheld PCs out there, the various versions of this. And what does the ROG Ally bring to the table here? So depending on which version you get an AMD Ryzen Z1 processor or a Z1 Extreme processor. I happen to have the Z1 version here, which is the cheaper version. You get 16 gigs of RAM, pretty standard for these devices. There's a 7-inch IPS screen at 1080p resolution, 120 hertz capable for both of them, and this is, again, pretty standard fare for a lot of these devices. This is probably the same screen they have in the MSI Claw. You can get 512 gigs of storage and a micro SD slot for expansion, but there is an asterisk after that, which we'll get to. You get Windows 11 for the operating system. There's a 40 watt-hour battery, which means that the ROG Ally, at least the original versions, do not have impressive battery life, so they're down near the bottom of the pile in that. But to be fair, none of these PC devices has, hours and hours and hours of battery life anyway. And in terms of mass, it's one of the lighter of the devices, coming in at only about 1.3 pounds. So, if weight is consideration, the ROG Ally is among the lighter of the devices. So, why might you want to get an ROG Ally? Well, for one thing, popularity has its advantages. So this device is pretty well supported. There's a lot of information out there on how to best configure your ROG Ally to play these games. So again, popularity has an advantage. Also with accessories, it's easy to find cases, screen protectors, and other doodads for an ROG Ally because they were pretty popular. Now, in terms of performance, if you're talking about the Z1 Extreme version, you get good performance for both emulation and modern games. If you're talking about the Z1 version, the good performance probably is for emulation. It is strong enough to do a lot of classic console emulation without too much difficulty, but it starts to struggle with modern games if you have the Z1 version. You do get a nice 120 hertz variable refresh rate screen, so games generally look pretty good on the ROG Ally. And if you're concerned about buying from a brick and mortar store or buying from a known name retailer, there are a lot of open box deals, and there's a presence in Best Buy, so you can literally just walk into a Best Buy and walk out with an ROG Ally today if you wanted to. No waiting for shipping at all. But there tends to be open box deals for the ROG Ally, so you can get an Ally at a pretty good price if you don't mind buying open box. Now, why might you want to skip the ROG Ally? I said before there was an asterisk with the microSD expansion for the ROG Ally, and the issue is, due to some bad design, the microSD slot can go out and it can actually take the card with it when it goes out. So ASUS did increase the warranty for the ROG Ally from 1 year to 2 years to kind of take that back. But if you're uncomfortable with the idea of there possibly being, you might think, a time bomb in your handheld in the microSD slot, then you might want to avoid the first generation ROG Allies. So there is a potential issue with the microSD slot, and again, you might be able to get it repaired, but this should have never happened in the first place. And they should just say, oh, if your SD slot goes out, no matter when it goes out, we'll fix it, but they only extended the warranty by another year. So microSD slot issues are a major reason why you might want to avoid the ROG Ally. Now, if you don't plan on ever using the microSD slot, this of course is a non-issue, but if you do, something to be concerned about. Also, instead of having a second USB slot, there is a proprietary port here which you can add an external GPU. Basically, since it's proprietary, they may as well not even have it, because the only GPU you can plug into this is absurdly expensive. So they may as well have just left it off or put a second USB slot on there, USB port on there. The other thing is these two ports are close together, so you actually have to look and see where you want to plug this in. So not only is it proprietary, it's positioned badly relative to the USB slot. So the proprietary GPU port is something that shouldn't have been on there. They should have just put on Oculink or just another USB port. Also, if you're looking to play modern games, I would avoid the Z1 version of the ROG Ally. It is substantially cheaper. I think at Best Buy currently you can buy a new Z1 for $350, and that is kind of appealing. But if you're looking to play modern games, and by modern I mean, pretty much all the current 3D stuff that you can get on the Steam store, like for example, even something as quote old as Borderlands 3, the Z1 version is going to be underpowered for that. You may be disappointed with the frame rate, and given that you can get good sales on some of the competitors to this device, I'd probably avoid the Z1 version unless you're strictly just looking to get the absolute cheapest thing possible, and you're looking more towards classic console emulation than playing modern games. So that doesn't apply to the Z1 Extreme though. Z1 Extreme is a pretty good performer from what I can tell, but for modern games I would recommend steering away from the Z1. This is the Lenovo Legion Go, certainly the largest of the devices we're looking at in this video. So what does the Lenovo Legion Go bring to the table? The Lenovo Legion Go is based on an AMD Ryzen Z1 Extreme processor, which means you get pretty good performance, as is standard with this generation of handhelds. You get 16 gigs of RAM. The kind of a standout thing here for the Legion Go is 8.8-inch screen, 2560 by 1600, so it's large, it's high resolution, and it can refresh up to 144 Hertz. So this is a very nice screen for gameplay. Storage options are 512 gigs and 1 terabyte. I have the 512 gig version, which is substantially cheaper. There's also a micro SD slot for expansion, so shouldn't have storage issues on this device. The operating system is Windows 11, again, pretty much standard for these. And you have a 49.2 watt-hour battery, which is larger than some of the competitors, but the Legion Go being a bit larger is a bit more of a battery hog. So the battery life on the Legion Go is not the best, but the battery life on all of these is not terribly great either. But Legion Go probably in the next generation should have a bigger battery. As far as mass, this is the heaviest of all these handhelds, clocking in at close to 2 pounds. So the Legion Go is definitely a big boy. Now, why might you want to pick up a Legion Go? For one thing, if you care about having a large screen experience, the Legion Go is the device that you want. This is a large screen. You get excellent immersive experience with this. Honestly, this is one of my favorite systems to play a lot of games on if I'm going to be sitting around the house on the couch or something like that. Because of the big screen, it looks really good. In terms of performance, you've got the Z1 Extreme processor here, which is giving you as good a performance as anything else you're going to get in this generation for at least a reasonable price. So you get pretty good performance for both emulation of old systems, which is a kind of a big deal around here, and also modern games as well. So you can sit back and play some of the newer games, like, for example, the new Atlas RPG Metaphor, and you get good performance on that. Also, one kind of unique thing on this is these detachable controllers. You can use FPS mode, and if you're curious as to how that works, this controller right here transforms into a mouse. This one you hold into your hand, and you can use it for moving around while you use the mouse here to aim, and they call that FPS mode. If you want to see how that actually works, I actually have a demonstration video on the channel. I'll probably link it in the description for you. But FPS mode is something that this handheld brings to the table that none of the others do. So you can basically, it's like you're carrying around a full gaming PC and are going to use a mouse and keyboard setup when you don't have to carry any of that stuff around. You just take the Legion Go in its case and you're good to go. Now, why you might want to skip the Legion Go. This is a heavy device. I tend to hold this thing basically resting on my legs, and as a result, the mass doesn't bother me. But if you want to hold this thing up, or if you're the kind who wants to game by laying down in the bed and holding this thing up over your head, the Legion Go is kind of heavy for that. So I don't think I would recommend this device if you're the kind that wants to hold the handheld up, like right in front of your face. But with the screen size, you don't really need to. But this is a heavy device, so if you're concerned about mass, you might want to skip the Lenovo Legion Go. Also, the sound quality of the Legion Go is a bit worse than some of the competitors here because the speakers are mounted on the top. And because we've got these top-mounted speakers, they're not firing at where you're sitting. They're not bouncing off of anything, so they're going to sound underwhelming compared to other devices. Now, to make matters worse, Lenovo chose sound defaults that make the speakers sound like really bad. So they chose bad sound defaults and they mounted the speakers in the wrong place. Now you can fix the sound defaults, and I actually have a video up on the channel that talks about, okay, here's where the settings that Lenovo messed up and here's how to fix it. Once you do that fix, the speakers sound okay, but they are definitely not anything nearly as impressive as, say, the MSI Claw. So sound quality is not the best because of poor speaker positioning, but I think that's probably less of an issue that people will have than the thing just being really heavy. So the Lenovo Legion Go is a really heavy boy, and if you don't like that sort of thing, you might want to look at a different handheld. This is the MSI Claw. Unlike the other handhelds in this video, this is the only one based on an Intel chip instead of an AMD chip. So, what does the Claw have going for it here? The Claw is based on either an Intel Ultra 5 or an Ultra 7 processor. I happen to have the Ultra 5 variant. It's slightly less expensive. You get 16 gigs of RAM, which is pretty standard for most of these handheld PCs. There's a 7-inch screen, 1080p, 120 hertz, which I believe is the same screen that they use in the ASUS ROG Ally handheld as well. You get a choice of 512 gigs or 1 terabyte storage. Of course, the 512 gig option is substantially cheaper, and there's a micro SD slot for expansion. You have Windows 11 and a battery that's somewhat larger in this device than some of the competitors, but despite the larger battery, the Intel chip here, it's probably not as efficient as the AMD. So in terms of actual battery life, this is pretty comparable to the other devices. And it's a little on the heavier side, being almost 1.5 pounds, but not as heavy, not the heaviest of the devices, but it is on the upper end of the weight scale. So, why might you want the Claw? Well, one thing, compared to pretty much all the other devices we have here, the Claw has actually very good speakers. It has a good sound system. You can actually hear a little bit of bass out of these, which is very unusual for one of these handhelds. Usually you just don't expect any bass at all out of the speakers, but there's a little bit of a chamber in here. You actually get a little bit of bass. In terms of performance, this device is comparable with the AMD Z1 Extreme devices. You don't get quite as good a performance out of this as for the Z1 Extreme, but in most cases it's pretty close. So the performance of this device kind of ranges because, you know, it's Intel. It's not directly comparable to the others, but it kind of ranges in between Steam Deck performance on the lower end and performance of the Z1 Extreme on the higher end. Although at least the Ultra 5 that I've tried doesn't really quite make it to being just as fast as a Z1 Extreme. Now, one thing that the Claw has going for it is there's been some really good sales on the Claw recently. I looked on Newegg, a little bit before recording this video, and on Amazon, and you can get these. I have actually seen them as low as $375 issued brand new for the Ultra 5, and right now they're just a hair over $400. So this is actually kind of a it used to be that the Claw was the most expensive of these handhelds. Now it's, with the sales, it is one of the cheapest, and you do get good performance for that. Now, why might you not want the Claw? Intel drivers, for one thing, kind of being the odd man out here. The Intel drivers are not as good as the AMD ones, so you may run into some compatibility issues with the Claw that you don't run into with some of the other handhelds we're talking about. But honestly, over the past, I'd say, month or so, I haven't really had any major compatibility issues using my Claw, and the games I've been trying out have all worked pretty much fine. But you do get less performance than those Z1 Extreme devices, like the ROG Ally, the Extreme version, and stuff like Lenovo's Legion Go. So that's something to consider. You can pick up this device pretty cheaply, but it is not getting quite as much performance as some of the competitors, although the competitors usually cost more these days. Here we have Valve's Steam Deck, the device which kind of started the entire handheld PC craze, or at least got it really off the ground. I know it wasn't the first handheld PC, but it was probably the first one that people really paid attention to. So, what does the Steam Deck have going for it? So, the Steam Deck uses actually a custom AMD chip, which Valve had AMD make for them. You get 16 gigs of RAM, which is pretty standard here. You get a 7.4-inch screen. The one I have is the OLED model. There is an LCD model that you can get for cheaper, but both of them have 1280 by 800 resolution, so 800p. And the OLED has a 90 Hz screen, while the LCD deck has 60 Hz. So there are some storage options for the OLED model anyway. You can have 512 gigs or 1 terabyte. There are some smaller storage options for the LCD model if you're interested in that. And there's also a micro SD slot, which you can use to put on more games. So storage shouldn't be a major issue with the Steam Deck, since it is, you can upgrade the SSD and you can upgrade the micro SD slot, but the micro SD slot's really simple. Unlike the other handheld PCs we've been talking about. The operating system is not Windows, it's SteamOS, which is a Linux-based distribution. In fact, you can actually run a KDE desktop environment if you like on the Steam Deck. Hook up a keyboard and a mouse, and you basically have a Linux PC. The OLED deck has an improved battery, 50 watt hours, which gives it probably the best overall battery life out of any of these devices that we've been talking about in this video here. The LCD deck has a smaller battery, so its battery life is less, but the Steam Deck generally, both of the models still have pretty good battery life. The OLED deck weighs in at 1.41 pounds, which is kind of middle of the road for these devices. Not overly heavy, not overly light either. But let's talk about why you might want the Steam Deck versus other handhelds. So, reasons why you might consider the Steam Deck for purchase is, do you want, for the OLED model, a great looking screen? So, this is the only, you might say, quote, budget device, as in under like close to $1,000, that has an OLED screen. Now, it's an 800p screen, but honestly, at the size, I don't see the low resolution to be a detriment here. The OLED looks really good playing both modern games and playing emulated, classic games from earlier eras. So it is a really good looking screen, despite being 800p. Now, the big draw of Steam Deck is, out of all of these devices, this is the one that acts most like a game console, like a PlayStation or a Nintendo Switch or what have you. So you get a very console-like software experience. You go in, you select games, you play them, the interface does what it's supposed to do, and it generally does a really good job of it. This is probably the best user experience, software experience out of any of the devices in this video. So you get a very console-like experience, very easy to pick up and play games using the Steam Deck. Things like suspend and resume work properly. So you can just hit the power button, come back later. Generally speaking, your games will still work. So, good software experience on the Steam Deck. Probably the best out of all of these. Also, performance is not bad. Steam Deck is getting kind of old, but in terms of performance, it's better than the Z1 Ally, but probably not as good as the Z1 Extreme devices and the MSI Claw kind of on the top end. But for many games, the Steam Deck does punch a bit above its weight because of the Linux operating system, having less overhead than Windows. But you get pretty good performance for most stuff, definitely for emulation and for a lot of other titles. Although, if you're looking for top performance, the Steam Deck is probably not it. And a lot of people talk about this, but for a good reason. The ergonomics of the Steam Deck are really nice. So it's very easy to hold, it's very easy to play. You've also got these track points here, track pads. So it's very easy to reach all the controls. If you're concerned about ergonomics, Steam Deck is definitely worth a look. It actually makes a big device, and I may have said this in other videos, it's easier to hold on to a Steam Deck than it is to hold on to most Android handhelds for a long period of time, because they really put some thought in the design, and it's really easy to hold without getting, hand cramps. Now, why might you not want the Steam Deck? Mainly, if you're concerned about high performance, the Steam Deck isn't all that anymore. There are a lot of other high performance options, some of which are cheaper than the Steam Deck if you're looking at the OLED version. So if you have performance concerns, you may want to look elsewhere. Now, another issue is that since the deck runs SteamOS, there are ways to kind of sideload Windows. But since the deck primarily runs SteamOS, there are titles on Steam that are just not compatible with the deck. So there are some titles that you won't be able to play on this device that you can play on the others just because of this handheld not being Windows. So So you need to watch out for that. In particular, if you're into multiplayer games, some of the anti-cheat systems just don't work with Linux on the Steam Deck. If you're not into competitive multiplayer, and probably you shouldn't be on a handheld, this is less of an issue, but it's still something worth pointing out. So performance and compatibility might be some reasons to choose a different handheld over the deck. So let's talk about size and mass of all of these devices. Of course, the Lenovo Legion Go is the largest of the devices, and the Anbernic WIN600 is the smallest. The Claw and the ROG Ally come in to be a pretty similar size, with the Steam Deck being a little bit larger in terms of just overall bulk than these two. But if you want to talk mass, let's just take a look at a little comparison. So you can see the Lenovo Legion Go is easily the heaviest of them, and the Claw is the second heaviest device, followed by the Steam Deck OLED. Now the Steam Deck OLED is slightly lighter than the LCD deck, so if you're considering the LCD deck, it is slightly heavier, although not a huge difference from what I can tell. The ROG Ally is on the lighter end of the scale, but once you're looking at basically anything that's not the Anbernic WIN600, and the Legion Go, the Ally, the Deck, and the Claw are all fairly similar in mass. So I don't notice a big difference in holding any of those three in terms of how heavy it feels. I just noticed that the Legion Go feels the heaviest, and the WIN600 is by far the lightest. So if mass is a concern, of course, maybe the Ally is, it's among the lighter of the handhelds, but it's not that much lighter than the Steam Deck. So I'd say, look at the WIN600, but there's so many reasons to not look at the WIN600. I'm not going to recommend that people buy that at all. So even if you are concerned about weight, you probably still want to avoid the WIN600. And certainly avoid the Legion Go if you're concerned about mass. Although the Legion Go actually has a kickstand, and the controllers can detach, so you don't actually have to hold it in your hand. It's more of a kind of portable gaming laptop if you choose to use it that way. But it is definitely heavy. So let's talk performance. I did some Cyberpunk benchmarking, and you can see most of these in individual videos on this channel. But why did I use Cyberpunk? Well, it's easy to do kind of a standard benchmark on Cyberpunk, and just from having used all these handhelds pretty extensively, I can say that the Cyberpunk benchmarks are pretty representative of just overall general performance of these devices. So the things that perform fastest in Cyberpunk also perform faster in other things. Now, of course, over there on the far left, you can see that the WIN600 is extremely underpowered in comparison to, well, any of the other devices here, which is why the main reason I don't really recommend anybody buy the WIN600, just because the performance is just so bad. Unless you get the thing really, really cheap and you have really low expectations, you're going to be disappointed with the WIN600. The Ally Z1 also is comparatively sluggish compared to the other devices. You can see that in Cyberpunk you get the lowest frame rates out of all the devices there. And in case you're wondering, all of these devices were tested at equivalent settings, so either screen resolutions of either 720p or 800p, depending on which device it was. The Steam Deck and the Legion Go have screens that are 16 by 10, so they got 800p, and the others got 720. Now, also, we were using a Steam Deck preset, which I'd modified to add frame generation. But other than that, it was a pretty standard setup, and all of the devices were tested using essentially the same settings. Now, if you want performance, the Legion Go obviously is head and shoulders over the other devices. Now, that said, I don't have a Z1 Extreme, ROG Ally, but if you tested the Z1 Extreme, it's going to end up being pretty similar to the Legion Go. So for the Z1 Extreme ROG Ally, you can expect, better performance. That's a consideration if you're getting that one. But again, the Z1, I don't recommend it for modern games because performance just isn't quite there. If I'm trying to play, say, Borderlands 3 or something like that on the Z1 version of the Ally, I'm kind of disappointed in the frame rates. You can't really get 60 frames per second there. You can kind of get like 40 to 45, which is kind of underwhelming. The Steam Deck's performance, as you can see, kind of lags the Claw and the Legion Go, but it is significantly better most of the time than the Z1 Ally. So, certainly the deck being one of the older devices here, it kind of that hurts it a bit, but I would definitely pick the deck over the Z1 Ally and certainly the WIN600, even if I was looking at just performance. Of course, the Claw, I have the Ultra 5 Claw. The Ultra 7 Claw may perform slightly better, but I don't have an Ultra 7 Claw to do the direct comparisons, but in everything I've looked up, the Ultra 7 Claw still doesn't quite close the gap between the Claw's performance and the Z1 Extreme devices like the Legion Go and the ROG Ally Z1 Extreme. And there's actually not, from what I can tell, much of a difference between the Ultra 5 and the Ultra 7 Claw in terms of raw performance. So that's something to consider, particularly if you can get a really good deal on the Ultra 5, the 135H Claw. So, performance-wise, the Z1 Extreme devices like the Legion Go and the ROG Ally, at least that version, definitely lead the pack here. So if you're picking performance, you probably want to pick one of those. So, to kind of sum up things, which device out of all of these array of choices here should you pick? And the answer to that is going to be, it depends. So if you are looking for smooth software experience, console-like, I would certainly recommend the Steam Deck OLED. Although, unless Valve puts this on sale, this is actually the most expensive of all these devices that you're seeing on the screen right now. So this comes in a little bit over $500 for the OLED version. You can get the LCD versions cheaper, but then you take a hit on screen quality, but otherwise they're pretty similar. So in terms of the software experience, I would definitely grab the Steam Deck, because short of just having a console, the Steam Deck provides you with a nice, smooth experience. If you just want to get into your games, Steam Deck is great for that. So, what if you want other considerations? If you want performance, you're going to want the Legion Go here, or you're going to want the Z1 Extreme version of the ROG Ally. Both of these now you can have for under $500, so actually less expensive than the current retail of the OLED Steam Deck. And so performance, one of these two. Stay away from the WIN600, stay away from the Z1 version of the Ally. Now, value for money. I think the MSI Claw actually makes a pretty compelling case here, because I've seen these recently, even right now, close to $400 new for the Ultra 5 version. I've seen it on Amazon and Newegg for prices like that for a brand new device. And as far as performance goes, you don't quite get the performance that you get out of the Z1 Extreme devices, but it is close. So this is a decent performing device, and these days you can almost get this, you might say, on a fire sale price. You can get these really cheap now. So yes, there are some drawbacks like the Intel drivers and whatnot, but in terms of power for cost, right now it is actually pretty hard to beat the Claw. So we've talked about software experience, Steam Deck is king. We talked about performance, the Z1 Extreme devices like the Ally and the Legion Go are definitely the top picks there. And so, okay, if I had to make the choice myself, and I didn't have all these devices already, which one would I pick if I only could pick one? And I think, honestly, if I could literally only pick one, at the moment I'd pick this, the Legion Go, because you've got the big screen experience here, you've got power. I can sit here and I can run Borderlands at 60 frames per second, Borderlands 3, and I'm happy. You also have control options, and it's made pretty solid. You got nice quality of life features like the kickstand here. The only drawbacks I really see to the Legion Go are that the software experience is a little bit janky. You've got Windows and you've got Legion Space, which is not quite as mature as, certainly not Steam OS or the Armory Crate on the ROG Ally. But overall, I'm thinking currently the Legion Go is probably my favorite all-rounder of this lot. Which ones of these do I actually use the most lately? Well, of course, the Legion Go for the performance and the big screen, and also the Steam Deck, because if things will play on the Steam Deck OLED screen is beautiful, and the software experience is really nice on the deck. So I'm still a big Steam Deck fan. But if I could only pick one, if you said, oh, I'm going to take away all your devices but one, which one do you get to keep? Well, right now I think I'm sticking with the Legion Go. It actually has a lot going for it for me. The only real killer for the Legion Go is if you are concerned about weight. So the Legion Go right now, I think you checked on Amazon, and it came up as currently on sales. I'm recording this video, $472 brand new, which I think is a kind of an outstanding deal. The Claw comes up cheaper still. So if you're still looking for performance on a budget, Claw's right there. But my personal favorite at the moment, and with the exception maybe of the Anbernic here, you can make cases for all these devices really. But I think my favorite right now is the Legion Go. So, hope you've enjoyed taking a tour of all of these PC devices. If you like the video, remember to leave a like. If you want to see more gaming, handheld, not all PC content, then remember to subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below, and I hope to see you next video.